Thank you very much indeed, and thank you everyone for staying with us for this long session. As Klaus has pointed out, fossil fuels are an extraordinary gift. If you read, for instance, the work of Professor Tony Wrigley, a historical demographer in the United Kingdom, he tries to answer the mystery of how the Industrial Revolution was sustained. And it is a mystery. All the philosophers and speculators of the day, Adam Smith, David Ricardo, Thomas Malthus, they all proposed that any growth in the industrial economy would immediately bounce back as if it was on an elastic band and lead to industrial collapse. And it just goes through a cycle of industrial growth and industrial collapse, because the economy at the time was land-based. In other words, the economy was organic. So, for instance, if you wanted to increase your production of iron, you would have to increase your production of charcoal. And to increase your production of charcoal, you had to increase your production of wood. To increase your production of wood, you had to plant more forest. You plant more forest, you take land away from agricultural production. And so nutrition declines, agricultural productivity declines, and the economic system then falls into collapse again. And it was the same if you wanted to increase the number of draft animals, which would do a lot of your hard labour for you. You increase the production of cattle or of horses in order to pull things and to turn wheels and to do all the other activities of primitive industrialisation, and you need greatly to increase the amount of land in order to feed those animals. It's a bit like the biofuels conundrum today. And so again, you're taking land away from agricultural production, and again, the productivity of agricultural labour declined significantly. And so what we saw was little peaks of industrialisation, collapsing, peaking, collapsing, because of those inherent constraints of the land-based organic economy. And none of these sages of the day predicted that that cycle could be broken in a sustained fashion. And so what Wrigley does is to examine how it is that for the first time in history, an industrial revolution could be sustained across not just years, not just decades, but even centuries. And the answer comes down to two very simple words: fossil fuels. It is only because of the extraction of fossil fuels that industrialization could be kept going and could continue to grow without undermining the very basis of society by destroying agricultural production. And this is an incredibly important and shocking discovery, because, as Klaus suggested, it shows just how dependent everything that we see as civilization is, and indeed how dependent the size of the global population is upon fossil fuels, and what a dangerous and precarious position we are in as a result of that great gift of the Carboniferous and of subsequent eras. Now, we're all here today in Copenhagen because of the price required to pay for that gift. And we know that the immediate price, which we're all discussing, is climate change. We've heard from Klaus and Jörg some of the other prices that may be paid alongside this. But let's stick for the time being to climate change and move on to the points they raise in a moment. I do not believe that any of the delegates, with the possible exception of the government of the Maldives, that any of the other delegates meeting in the Bella Centre at the moment are serious about tackling climate change. And that's a sweeping statement, but I can justify it with a sweeping observation. And that is that all of them, currently, all those who are in a position to do so, have two policies on fossil fuels. The first policy is to encourage their people and to strike a global agreement to minimise global demand for fossil fuels. They want us all to reduce our demand as much as possible by buying more efficient cars or switching to public transport, by changing our light bulbs, by improving our refrigeration, by putting insulation in our loft, to minimise demand for fossil fuels. That, supposedly, is the aim. At the same time, all those nations on Earth, and I mean all of them with one possible exception, which I will come on onto in a moment, all of those nations are seeking simultaneously to maximise the supply of fossil fuels. All those who have fossil fuels in their national territory. And in fact, there's a fascinating paper published recently by the UK government, which is about the low carbon transition. It's this new policy paper. And on one page you will find the requirement to cut the use of carbon-based fuels by as much as possible. Just a few pages later you will find this statement: our aim is to maximise the economic potential of coal, oil and gas in the UK and on the UK continental shelf. Directly, flatly contradictory policies. And until they engage with that contradiction, in fact until they even acknowledge that contradiction, which they are currently failing to do, the one policy will continue to undermine the other one. And by maximising the supply, they will make it impossible to minimise demand, because they keep the price down, particularly they keep the carbon price down, and they constantly undermine the alternatives, which are currently more expensive than fossil fuels are. And I'm staggered by the fact that all the government representatives and civil servants I've met with whom I've raised this issue, and there have been quite a few, react to it as if they've never heard about it before. It is wholly new to them. They've never been confronted with it before, because no one is talking about the supply of fossil fuels. Everyone is talking about demand. And I was speaking to a senior civil servant at the Department of Energy in the British government recently, and he said, well, you know, we really are making this transition to clean coal. We're going to put it in law that there's going to be carbon capture and storage. And then, you know, you really can't object any further to coal-based power generation once that's done. And I said, have you seen where this stuff is dug out? And he said, no. And I said, go and take a look in South Wales at the open cast coal mines there, and stand on the edge of one of those mines and then say clean coal. Some of them are 2 miles across, that's like 3 kilometres across, and 200 metres deep. And they're right on the edge of people's homes, 37 metres from the nearest homes in one case. And he said, no, those must be old pits. I said, I've seen that they're being dug right now. It's happening as we speak. There's been a massive increase in applications and permissions for open cast coal mines. And this was totally new to him. He had no idea about this at all. Because within the Energy Department, it's called the Department of Energy and Climate Change, there are two completely different streams. There's a climate change side, which tries to minimise demand for fossil fuels and tries to minimise everything to do with fossil fuels. And there's the energy side, which tries to maximise the supply of fossil fuels and everything to do with fossil fuels. And they don't talk to each other. And so neither side has any idea what's going on in the other half of their own government department. Now, the reason this is relevant is not just because it undermines the demand side policies on climate change, but also because it makes it impossible to meet the government's aim, the aim of all the governments meeting here at Copenhagen, to cap global temperatures at no more than 2 degrees of warming. And in fact, many of the poorer governments are now talking about 1.5 degrees of warming. But let's, for the sake of argument, stick with this 2 degrees figure.